Montana Territory, 1882. The prairie wind howled like a wounded animal, driving dust and broken promises across the barren landscape. Amelia Mackintosh stood on the porch of the general store in Silver Creek, clutching a letter that confirmed what the town had whispered for weeks. At 21, with her chestnut hair pulled into a simple bun and her blue calico dress faded from too many washings, she had become something worse than a widow, a wife abandoned. "He's married her," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. Thomas actually married that banker's daughter in Helena. 2 years of marriage wiped away with a few hastily scrawled lines. Thomas had left 6 months prior, claiming to seek better prospects. Now she knew what prospects he'd truly sought, a younger woman with a wealthy father. Amelia folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket as she blinked back tears. She believed, deep in her bones, that love was a luxury afforded to those in the safety of eastern cities, not the harsh Montana frontier. Out here, marriage was a practical arrangement for survival, and she'd been foolish enough to forget that. The frontier stripped away pretense, leaving only the brutal truth. You relied on yourself or you perished. Inside the store, she gathered what supplies she could afford. The ranch Thomas had left behind was small, barely sustainable, but it was all she had. She'd been managing alone these 6 months, and she'd continue to do so until winter forced her hand. "Put it on the account," she told Mr. Finley, the storekeeper. "About that, Mrs. Mackintosh." The man cleared his throat. "Without your husband?" "Well, I can't extend credit indefinitely. I'll pay what I owe by month's end," Amelia said, straightening her shoulders. "The cattle will fetch enough." "The cattle that need driving to market?" Finley's eyebrows rose. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but a woman alone can't drive cattle to Billings." The store fell quiet as the door swung open. A young man stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal sandy blonde hair. The dust of the trail covered his clothes, but couldn't disguise the lean, athletic build of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Pardon my interruption," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas, but I couldn't help overhearing. His eyes, clear blue as a mountain lake, met Amelia's. "My name's Ryan Vance. I'm looking for work, and it sounds like you might need a hand." Amelia studied the stranger. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25, with a light stubble that did little to hide a strong jawline. His clothes were worn but clean, his manner respectful without being subservient. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Room, board, and a fair share when the cattle sell is all I ask," he replied. "Been riding north from Texas, looking for a place to winter." Finley leaned close to Amelia. "You ought to be careful about taking in strangers, Mrs. Mackintosh. A woman alone is exactly why I need help with the herd." She finished for him, her decision made. "Mr. Vance, if you're still interested, the offer stands." The young cowboy nodded. "I'll gather my things and meet you outside." As Ryan Vance loaded her supplies onto her wagon, Amelia wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But the truth remained. Without help, she'd lose everything by winter. "I should warn you," she said as they left town. "The place isn't much. 60 head of cattle, a small cabin, and more work than 2 people can reasonably handle." Ryan's hands were steady on the reins. "I've seen hard times before, Mrs. Mackintosh. The work doesn't scare me. It's the solitude that gets most people," she responded. "We're 15 miles from town, and the nearest neighbor is 5 miles beyond that." "Solitude suits me fine," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Been riding alone since Amarillo. Man learns to appreciate his own company or goes mad talking to his horse." Amelia couldn't help but smile at that. "And which did you choose, Mr. Vance?" "Oh, I talked to the horse," he admitted with a slight grin. "But he's a poor conversationalist." As they crested the hill overlooking her homestead, Amelia saw it through Ryan's eyes. A small cabin with a lean-to barn, a corral in need of repair, and rolling grassland stretching toward distant mountains. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Or it would be, if she could hold on to it. "Thomas left in spring," she found herself saying. "Said he was seeking better prospects in Helena. Today I learned those prospects included a banker's daughter with a substantial dowry." Ryan's expression remained carefully neutral. "Some men don't recognize value when it's right in front of them, ma'am." The first weeks established their routine. Ryan rose before dawn to tend the horses and check the cattle. Amelia cooked and mended and kept the small garden that provided their vegetables. They worked side by side repairing fences, her hands becoming as calloused as his. Ryan proved himself both competent and respectful, keeping a proper distance while still being companionable. But Amelia maintained her guard. Her belief that the frontier was no place for emotional entanglements had only been reinforced by Thomas's abandonment. "You never speak of family," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, the day's work done and darkness settling over the land. "Not much to tell," Ryan replied, whittling a piece of wood. "Father died when I was 14. Mother followed 2 years later. Been on my own since." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged. "Taught me self-reliance. Out here, that's worth more than sentiment." The words echoed her own beliefs so perfectly that Amelia felt a strange kinship with this quiet cowboy. "My parents died crossing the Oregon Trail when I was 16. Fever took them both within days of each other. I came to Montana with my uncle, who passed 3 years ago." "Is that when you married Thomas?" She nodded. He seemed steady, reliable. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Shows what I know about judging character." Ryan's hand stilled. "Your husband's foolishness doesn't reflect on your judgment, Mrs. Mackintosh. Some men aren't built for frontier life. Takes more than muscle, takes heart." His words stayed with Amelia as she lay in bed that night, listening to the coyote's distant howl. For the first time in months, the ranch didn't feel quite so empty. The cattle drive to Billings was set for early October, before the first snows made the trails impassable. As they worked to prepare, Amelia found herself watching Ryan more often. The confident way he handled the horses, his gentle patience with the skittish calves, the quiet competence in everything he did. "You're good with animals," she observed one afternoon as they treated a heifer with a wounded leg. "Animals make sense," he answered, his hands steady as he applied the salve. "They don't pretend to be something they're not. A wolf doesn't apologize for its nature, nor does a hawk or a deer. And people—" Ryan glanced up, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "People are the only creatures that lie to themselves about what they are and what they want." Before Amelia could respond, hoofbeats approached. 3 riders appeared, and she recognized Frank Holloway, who owned the neighboring ranch, along with 2 of his hands. "Amelia," Holloway called, dismounting. He was a man in his 50s with a prosperous belly and small, calculating eyes. "Heard you were preparing to drive your cattle to market." "That's right, Frank. Seems a waste for you to make that journey with such a small herd. I'm taking mine next week. I could include yours for a reasonable percentage." "That's kind, but we've made our arrangements," Amelia replied. Holloway's gaze shifted to Ryan, assessing. "Don't believe we've met." "Ryan Vance," the cowboy said, stepping forward to offer his hand. "Working for Mrs. Mackintosh." "Indeed." Holloway's eyebrows rose. "Didn't realize you were hiring, Amelia. When Thomas returns—" "Thomas isn't returning," she cut him off. "He's remarried in Helena." "Well now." Holloway's expression shifted to poorly disguised interest. "That puts things in a different light. Without a husband, this place is too much for you to manage. I've always said this grazing land would complement my holdings nicely. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer." Amelia stiffened. "The ranch isn't for sale. Be reasonable," Holloway persisted. "Winter's coming. A woman alone—" "Mrs. Mackintosh isn't alone," Ryan interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "And she's made her position clear." Holloway's face darkened. "You do well to mind your own business, cowboy. This is between neighbors." "Mrs. Mackintosh's affairs are my business, as I'm in her employ," Ryan replied evenly. His posture remained relaxed, but Amelia noticed his right hand had drifted closer to his hip, where his revolver hung. Tension crackled like heat lightning. Finally, Holloway remounted his horse. "Think about my offer, Amelia. It'll still stand after this one moves on." With a contemptuous glance at Ryan, he and his men rode away. "He'll be trouble," Ryan observed, watching them disappear over the rise. "Frank's been trying to buy this land since Thomas left," Amelia sighed. "He thinks a woman can't run a ranch alone. Then we'll prove him wrong." Ryan's voice carried such certainty that Amelia found herself believing him. For the first time since Thomas's letter, hope flickered within her. The night before they were to begin the cattle drive, a fierce autumn storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain hammered the cabin roof, while lightning split the sky and thunder shook the walls. "The creek will flood," Ryan said grimly, pulling on his slicker. We need to move the cattle to higher ground. Amelia grabbed her own coat. I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous, he protested. It's my herd, she countered, already heading for the door. The storm's fury was worse than it had sounded from inside. Rain drove horizontally, stinging Amelia's face as they rode toward the pasture. The cattle were already restless, spooked by the thunder. Working together, they began herding them toward the northern slope. Lightning revealed the creek had indeed breached its banks, water rushing toward the lower pasture with frightening speed. As they urged the last stragglers uphill, a massive thunderclap directly overhead sent the herd into panic. The cattle bolted, scattering in all directions. Head them off, Ryan shouted over the storm, spurring his horse toward the largest group. Amelia rode hard, trying to turn a half-dozen steers back toward the main herd. She didn't see the washed-out ground until her horse stumbled, throwing her from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her ankle as she rolled away from the frightened animal's hooves. Ryan appeared seemingly from nowhere, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Are you hurt?" he shouted above the storm. "My ankle," she gasped. "The cattle, forget the cattle." He lifted her easily, setting her on his horse before mounting behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body warm and solid against her back. "Hold tight." The ride back to the cabin passed in a blur of pain and rain. Inside, Ryan eased her onto a chair and knelt to examine her ankle, his hands gentle as they removed her mud-soaked boot. "Not broken," he pronounced after careful probing. "Badly sprained. You'll need to stay off it for a few days. The cattle drive will wait until you're healed," he said firmly, rising to stoke the fire. Amelia watched as he moved about the cabin, gathering supplies to tend her injury. In the firelight, with his hair damp and his shirt clinging to broad shoulders, Ryan Vance looked like something from a painting, the embodiment of frontier strength and unexpected tenderness. "Why did you come here, Ryan?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." He paused, bandages in hand. "I told you. You told me you were looking for work. But good cowboys are in demand everywhere. Why my small, struggling ranch?" Ryan returned to kneel beside her, carefully wrapping her ankle before answering. "I heard about you in town. How you were trying to hold on after your husband left. It reminded me of my mother, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to give up. And you appointed yourself my rescuer?" There was an edge to her voice. "No," he said quietly. "I saw someone fighting the same loneliness I've been running from. I thought maybe we could help each other." The simple honesty of his answer struck Amelia silent. She'd been so determined to prove she needed no one that she hadn't recognized the gift of his arrival, not just his labor, but his companionship. "Thank you," she said finally, "for staying." His eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Get some rest, Amelia. I'll check on the cattle at first light." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice followed her into sleep. The sprained ankle delayed their cattle drive by nearly a week. During that time, their careful distance eroded. Ryan brought her meals, helped her move about the cabin, and in the evenings read aloud from the few books she owned. She learned he'd had some schooling, unusual for a drifting cowboy, and that he could recite passages of Shakespeare from memory. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," he explained when she expressed surprise. "She believed education was more valuable than gold." "She sounds remarkable," Amelia said, watching him by firelight. "She was." His voice softened with memory. "Taught me that a man's worth isn't in what he owns or how hard his fists are, but in how he treats those who can't repay him." "She'd be proud of the man you've become," Amelia said without thinking. Ryan looked up, vulnerability flashing across his features before he masked it. "I hope so." When they finally began the cattle drive to Billings, Amelia insisted on riding despite Ryan's concerns about her ankle. The journey would take nearly a week, camping each night under the vast Montana sky. On their third night, as they sat beside the campfire after a long day in the saddle, Ryan finally asked the question Amelia had been dreading. "What will you do after the cattle are sold?" She poked at the fire with a stick. "Return to the ranch. Try to make it through winter. Alone." The word hung in the air between them. Amelia stared into the flames. "I've grown accustomed to my own company." "Have you?" Ryan's voice was gentle. "Or have you just convinced yourself it's all you deserve?" "What I deserve." Anger flared unexpectedly. My husband abandoned me for another woman. What exactly do you think I deserve, Mr. Vance? More than loneliness as penance for his failures, Ryan answered steadily. You didn't cause his leaving, Amelia. Some men are just cowards. And you're not, she challenged, her defenses rising. A drifter who never stays anywhere long enough to put down roots? How is that not cowardice? Pain flashed across his face before his expression closed. You're right. I've been running. But not from responsibility, from ghosts. The rawness in his voice doused her anger. What ghosts, Ryan? He was quiet, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his eyes fixed on the fire. I killed a man. 3 years ago, in Cheyenne. Amelia's breath caught. Was it justified? The law thought so. He drew first, a card cheat who didn't like being called out. But taking a life. Ryan shook his head. It changes you. Makes you question what kind of man you are. So you've been wandering ever since. Looking for redemption, maybe. Or just running from the memory. His eyes met hers across the fire. Until I saw your ranch. Something about that place, about you fighting to hold on to it alone. It felt like somewhere I could stop running. The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. For the first time, Amelia saw past the capable cowboy to the wounded soul beneath. A man running from his past just as she was hiding from her future. I'm afraid, she admitted, her own voice barely audible. Afraid of failing. Of losing everything Thomas and I built. You won't fail, Ryan said with quiet certainty. And it's not what you and Thomas built anymore. It's yours now. You've already done what everyone said you couldn't, survived without him. His faith in her was like a warm cloak against the cold night. Without analyzing her actions, Amelia rose and moved to sit beside him. When his arm cautiously encircled her shoulders, she leaned into his warmth, allowing herself this moment of comfort beneath the star-scattered sky. In Billings, they received a fair price for the cattle, enough to see Amelia through the winter with some put-by for spring. As they walked the busy streets, supplies loaded in their wagon for the return journey, Ryan seemed distracted. I received an interesting offer, he said as they left the mercantile. The cattle buyer has a herd needs driving to Wyoming. The pay is good. Amelia's heart contracted painfully, though she kept her expression neutral. You're considering it? I told him I had prior commitments, Ryan replied, watching her face closely. But it made me realize we haven't discussed what happens next. You've fulfilled your obligation, she said stiffly. The cattle are sold. You're free to take whatever opportunity suits you. Ryan stopped walking, turning to face her. Is that what you want? For me to leave? Before she could answer, a commotion erupted down the street. A man staggered from a saloon, pointing directly at them. Vance, he shouted, his voice slurred with drink. Ryan Vance. Ryan pushed Amelia behind him, his posture instantly alert. Stay back, he murmured. The drunk man stumbled closer, hatred contorting his features. Thought I recognized you. You killed my brother in Cheyenne. Your brother drew on me. Mercer, Ryan replied evenly. The law called it self-defense. Law be damned. Mercer's hand moved toward his holster. I've been looking for you for 3 years. Several bystanders scattered, while others pressed against storefronts to watch. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what was happening. I don't want trouble, Ryan said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from him. I'm not wearing a gun. It was true. Ryan had left his revolver at the hotel, as many establishments in Billings prohibited firearms. Perfect. Mercer laughed, an ugly sound. Makes my job easier. In the space of a heartbeat, several things happened at once. Mercer drew his revolver. Ryan lunged toward him. And Amelia, acting on instinct, pulled the small derringer she carried in her handbag, a precaution for a woman traveling with cash from cattle sales. Stop, she commanded, her voice ringing with authority as she leveled the small gun at Mercer. The sheriff's office is just down the street, and I promise I can hit you before you get a shot off. Mercer froze, his bloodshot eyes swinging between Ryan and Amelia. The street had gone deathly quiet. She's a better shot than she looks, Ryan added calmly. And unlike me, she's armed. For a moment, the tableau held. Mercer with his gun half raised. Amelia with her derringer steady despite her pounding heart. Ryan poised to move if necessary. This ain't over, Vance. Mercer finally growled, lowering his weapon. I'll find you when you ain't hiding behind a woman's skirts. You know where I'll be, Ryan replied. But come sober, Because if you threaten Mrs. Mackintosh again, you'll wish you hadn't. As Mercer slunk away, Amelia's hands began to shake. Ryan gently took the derringer from her grip. "Let's get back to the hotel," he murmured, his hand at the small of her back. In their separate rooms that night, Amelia lay awake, replaying the confrontation in her mind. Ryan had been prepared to face Mercer unarmed to protect her, and she, who had sworn to need no one, had intervened to protect him. What did that mean? They departed Billings early the next morning. Ryan had arranged with the sheriff to be notified if Mercer caused any further trouble, but the man had apparently left town on the evening stage. The journey back to the ranch was quieter than their trip out. Something had shifted between them, a truth neither was ready to name. As the familiar hills came into view on the fourth day, Amelia felt both relief and trepidation. What would happen once they returned? Ryan broke the silence as they crested the final rise. "I need to tell you something." Amelia's heart constricted. Here it comes, she thought. His goodbye? I saw Thomas in Billings. Of all the things she'd expected, this wasn't it. What? Ryan's jaw tightened. "He was at the bank when I went to deposit your money. He recognized me from descriptions around town. The cowboy working your ranch." Amelia's hands tightened on the reins. "Did he speak to you?" "He did. Asked if you were in town. When I said yes, he seemed concerned about his reputation. Wanted to know if you were telling people he'd abandoned you." "What did you tell him?" "That you were too busy succeeding without him to waste breath on his name." Ryan's voice carried quiet anger. "He didn't like that much." "I imagine not," Amelia said, surprised to find she felt nothing but a distant pity for Thomas. "Did he mention his new wife?" "He did. Repeatedly. Seemed very eager to impress upon me that he'd married up into banking society." Ryan shook his head. "I don't think he realizes what he threw away." As they approached the ranch, smoke rising from a chimney stopped them both short. Someone was in her cabin. Ryan immediately reached for his rifle. "Stay behind me," he ordered, all business now. They approached cautiously. As they neared the cabin, the door opened and Frank Holloway stepped onto the porch, looking smug. "Welcome home, Amelia," he called. "I've been keeping an eye on the place while you were gone." "I didn't ask you to," she replied, dismounting. "What are you doing in my house, Frank?" "Just being neighborly." His gaze shifted to Ryan, hardening. "Though I see you still have your help." Ryan's expression remained impassive, but Amelia could sense the tension in him. "Thank you for your concern," she said firmly. "But as you can see, we've returned safely. You can go now." Holloway didn't move. "Actually, I think we should talk business. I've had a surveyor out while you were gone. Seems there's a question about the boundary line between our properties." "There's no question," Amelia retorted. "The boundary is clearly marked and recorded at the county office." "Well, there's some dispute about water rights to the creek." Holloway smiled thinly. "Could take months to resolve legally. Meanwhile, winter's coming and cattle need water." The threat was clear. Holloway was attempting to force her hand, to make selling to him the only reasonable option. "Get off my land," Amelia said, her voice deadly quiet. "Now, be reasonable." "You heard the lady," Ryan interjected, stepping forward. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." Holloway's face flushed with anger. "You don't belong here, drifter. This is between established Montana ranchers, one of whom is standing right here." Amelia cut in, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ryan. "And she's telling you to leave." For a tense moment, it seemed Holloway might refuse. Then, with a muttered curse, he pushed past them to his horse. "This isn't over," he warned. "That creek access will be mine one way or another." As he rode away, Amelia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He was inside my home," she said, outrage building now that the confrontation was over. Ryan's expression was grim. "He's making his play now because he thinks you're vulnerable. We need to be prepared for more trouble." "We?" Amelia asked, the word catching in her throat. Ryan turned to her, determination etched in every line of his face. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone, Amelia. Not unless you ask me to go." The conviction in his voice made her heart stutter. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you stay and fight someone else's battle?" "Because it's not someone else's battle. It's yours." His eyes held hers, allowing her to see the emotion he'd kept carefully guarded until now. "And somewhere between mending your fences and driving your cattle, your battles became mine too." In that moment, standing in the yard of the ranch she'd fought so hard to keep, Amelia recognized the truth she'd been denying. She'd built walls to protect herself from further abandonment, convincing herself that frontier life demanded isolation and self-reliance. But in doing so, she'd nearly missed the very thing that made the harsh landscape bearable: connection. "I don't want you to go," she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. "But I can't ask you to stay out of obligation or pity." "Obligation?" Ryan stepped closer, his voice softening. "Amelia, do you really not see? I stayed because in all my wandering, this is the first place that's felt like somewhere I could belong. Not because of the land, but because of you." His words unlocked something within her. Hope, fragile but undeniable. Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached again. But this time, it wasn't Holloway returning. Thomas Mackintosh rode into the yard. Amelia froze, disbelieving. Her estranged husband looked much as he had when he left. Handsome in a conventional way, now dressed in finer clothes than he'd ever worn on the ranch. "Amelia," he greeted, dismounting. His gaze flickered to Ryan, dismissive. "I need to speak with my wife." "Privately." "Ex-wife," she corrected automatically, still stunned by his appearance. "Why are you here, Thomas?" He straightened his jacket, looking uncomfortable. "My father-in-law, that is, Catherine's father, has business interests. He wants to expand into this region. When I mentioned I still technically own property here, you don't own anything here." Amelia interrupted, anger replacing shock. "You abandoned this ranch and me with it." Thomas had the grace to look embarrassed. "Legally, the deed is still in both our names. I've come to discuss a fair settlement." Ryan had remained silent, but now he stepped forward. "Mr. Mackintosh, your timing is interesting. Mrs. Mackintosh has just returned from selling cattle that she raised without your help, on land she's maintained without your presence." Thomas's expression soured as he looked at Ryan. "And you are?" "Ryan Vance. I work for Mrs. Mackintosh." "Is that all you do?" Thomas asked with ugly insinuation. Before Ryan could respond, Amelia stepped between them. "You gave up any right to question my associations when you married another woman, Thomas." Her husband, former husband, had the decency to flush. "I didn't come to argue, Amelia. I came with a proposition. Catherine's father is willing to buy out my share of this property at a fair market value. You'd receive half the proceeds, enough to start over somewhere more suitable for a woman alone." "I'm not selling," Amelia stated flatly. "And I'm not alone." Thomas's gaze darted between her and Ryan, comprehension dawning. "So the rumors are true. You've taken up with a drifter." "Careful," Ryan warned, his voice low. "The rumors?" Amelia asked, her temper rising. "Is that why you're really here, Thomas? Worried about your reputation in Helena society if word gets out you abandoned your wife and she succeeded without you?" Thomas's expression confirmed her suspicion. "Catherine's family is very concerned with appearances. When Frank Holloway wrote to me about the situation here, Holloway wrote to you." Ryan interrupted, pieces falling into place. "He's been trying to force Mrs. Mackintosh off this land for months." Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. Frank may have his own interests, but his concerns about propriety aren't unfounded. A woman living alone with a hired hand, it raises questions. "The only impropriety I see," Amelia said coldly, "is a man who abandoned his wife, married another woman, and now returns to claim property he deserted." "The law will side with me, Amelia," Thomas warned. "This territory isn't kind to women in property disputes." "Then we'll have to see what the law says about abandonment and bigamy," she countered. "Did you bother to divorce me before marrying Catherine?" The flash of panic across Thomas's face was answer enough. "I thought not," Amelia continued. "How do you think your father-in-law would react to learning his daughter isn't legally married? That his precious family name is associated with a bigamist?" Thomas paled. "You wouldn't. I've spent 6 months fighting to keep this ranch alive while you've been playing the prosperous businessman in Helena," Amelia said, stepping closer. "Don't test my resolve now." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the autumn-dried grass. Finally, Thomas reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "I brought papers," he said stiffly. "A transfer of deed. Sign it, and I'll leave you the ranch." "In exchange for what?" Ryan asked, suspicious. Her silence, Thomas replied. "And a formal divorce that states abandonment without mentioning my current marriage." Amelia took the papers, hardly daring to believe it could be this simple. You'd give up your claim to the ranch just to protect your reputation? Catherine's father values his family's standing above all else. Thomas explained, not meeting her eyes. If word of this irregular situation reached Helena, I'd lose everything. Unlike what I lost when you left. Amelia couldn't resist asking. Thomas finally looked at her directly. I wasn't suited to this life, Amelia. We both know that. You were always stronger than me, more determined. This place deserves someone who loves it as you do. The admission, the closest thing to an apology she would likely ever receive, closed something within Amelia. The hurt and betrayal that had fueled her for months suddenly seemed distant, unimportant. I'll sign your papers, she said. On one condition. You use your influence with your father-in-law's bank to ensure Frank Holloway can't interfere with my water rights. Thomas nodded, relief evident in his posture. I'll see to it personally. As the sun set over the Montana prairie, Amelia Mackintosh stood on her porch alone now, by legal right, and watched Thomas's horse disappear over the horizon. The signed deed transfer was safely tucked away in her bureau drawer. Are you all right? Ryan asked, coming to stand beside her. Better than all right, she answered honestly. I feel free. Ryan studied her face in the fading light. Free to do what? Amelia turned to him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes despite his confident bearing. This man who had ridden into her life when she most needed help, who had stood beside her against threats both physical and legal, who had shown her that strength could be found in connection rather than isolation. Free to build something new, she said softly. If you're still looking for somewhere to belong. Ryan's expression softened, hope replacing wariness. Are you asking me to stay, Amelia Mackintosh? I'm asking if you see a future here, she clarified, her heart racing. Not as my employee, but as my partner. In all things. Ryan stepped closer, his hand gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I've seen that future since the first day I rode up that hill. A ranch that could thrive with enough care and work. A woman who needed to be reminded that she wasn't meant to face the frontier alone. And a cowboy who needed to stop running, she added, leaning into his touch. Her husband took another bride, Ryan murmured, drawing her closer. So I'll take his greatest loss, the woman he was too blind to value. When his lips met hers, Amelia felt the last of her barriers crumble. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with shared longing that had built over months of working side by side, of trusting and protecting one another. I love you, Amelia, Ryan whispered against her lips. Not because you need saving, but because you remind me what it means to fight for something worth having. I love you too, she admitted, the words no longer frightening. And I don't want to face another winter without you beside me. They were married 3 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church. The gossips who had pitted poor abandoned Amelia now whispered about the handsome young cowboy who looked at her as if she hung the moon and stars. As they drove back to the ranch that evening, newlywed and facing their first winter together, Amelia felt a contentment she'd never thought possible on the harsh Montana frontier. What are you thinking? Ryan asked, his arms secure around her waist as he handled the reins. Amelia looked across the land that stretched before them, their land now, their future. I'm thinking that we've proven them all wrong. The ones who said a woman couldn't run a ranch alone, that you were just a drifter passing through, that love doesn't last on the frontier. Ryan's smile warmed her more than the buffalo robe covering their laps. We're just getting started proving them wrong, Mrs. Vance. Just wait until spring. As their cabin came into view, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney where they'd left a fire banked, Amelia felt the truth of it settle in her bones. The frontier wasn't a place that demanded isolation and hardened hearts. It was a place that tested what mattered most, and what mattered, what truly sustained life in this wild country, was having someone to share both the struggles and the beauty. Ryan Vance had ridden into her life when she most needed to remember that truth. And now, as they crossed the threshold of their home together, Amelia knew they would face whatever came next, winter storms, spring floods, summer droughts. Not alone, but side by side.